He sat in the corner of the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, wearing a frayed coat that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster. The staff ignored him. The wealthy patrons sneered at him. Derek, the arrogant manager, was seconds away from calling security to throw him out like trash. They all thought he was a homeless man trying to steal warmth. They were wrong. Dead wrong. They didn't know that the man they were mocking could buy the entire building with a single signature. And they definitely didn't expect the trembling waitress to whisper 6 words in his native tongue that would bring the billionaire's empire crashing down on their heads. The rain in New York City didn't just fall, it hammered against the glass, turning the streets of Manhattan into a blur of grey and neon. Inside Lure Door, however, the chaos of the outside world was strictly forbidden. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and old money. It was the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than most people's rent, and the clientele, politicians, tech moguls and heiresses, expected nothing less than perfection. Sophie smoothed the front of her apron, her hands shaking slightly. It was only her 3rd week at Lure's Door. She needed this job. Her student loans were suffocating her, and her mother's medical bills back in Ohio were piling up on the kitchen counter like a monument to their bad luck. She couldn't afford a single mistake. Table 4 needs water. Table 7 wants the sommelier. And for God's sake, Sophie, stop looking like a frightened deer, Derek snapped as he breezed past her. Derek was the floor manager, a man who wore his Italian suits like armor and treated his staff like expendable ammunition. He had slicked back hair and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. To Derek, Lure's Door wasn't a restaurant. It was a stage, and he was the director who tolerated no bad actors. "Yes, Derek. Sorry, Derek," Sophie murmured, grabbing a crystal pitcher of water. She navigated the dining room, a labyrinth of white tablecloths and hushed conversations. As she poured water for a couple arguing quietly about a prenup, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant creaked open. Usually, the arrival of a guest brought a flurry of activity. The hostesses would beam, Derek would rush forward with open arms, and heads would turn to see who had arrived. But this time, the room went silent for the wrong reason. The man standing in the entryway looked like a mistake. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair that hadn't seen a comb in days. He wore a heavy, woolen coat that was frayed at the cuffs and stained with the city's grime. His boots were muddy, leaving dark smears on the pristine marble floor. He clutched a wet plastic shopping bag in one hand. The hostess, a young woman named Jessica, who prided herself on being a gatekeeper for the elite, froze. Her smile vanished. "Sir," she said, her voice raising an octave so the nearby tables could hear her authority. "Delivery entrance is in the back, or if you're looking for a handout, the shelter is 3 blocks east." The man didn't move. He blinked, his blue eyes watery and tired, scanning the room with a confused intensity. He didn't speak. He just took a step forward. "Excuse me." Derek materialized from the shadows, his face flushed with indignation. He marched toward the entrance, snapping his fingers at the security guard near the coat check. "Get him out. Now. We have a reputation to uphold." The dining room rippled with whispers. "Is that a homeless man? How did he get past the doorman? Disgusting. I'm losing my appetite." Sophie watched from the service station, her heart squeezing. She saw something the others didn't. The man wasn't aggressive. He looked exhausted. He looked lost. There was a trembling in his hands that reminded her of her own grandfather before he passed. "I have reservation," the man rasped. His voice was thick, heavily accented, and barely audible over the ambient jazz music. He struggled with the English words as if they were stones in his mouth. Derek laughed, a cruel, barking sound. A reservation? You? Look at yourself. A reservation requires a credit card, not a collection of tin cans. Please leave before I have you physically removed. The security guard, a burly man named Thomas, stepped forward, gripping the old man's arm. Come on, pal, let's go. The old man flinched, pulling his arm away with surprising strength. No, table for one, please. It was a scene of utter humiliation. The wealthy patrons were openly staring now, entertained by the cruelty. Beatrice Vanderwall, a socialite known for her divorces and her temper, sat at the best table near the window. She swirled her Pinot Noir and called out, "Derek, darling, get rid of the stray, would you? He smells like wet dog." Laughter rippled through the room. That was when Sophie moved. She didn't think about her rent. She didn't think about the medical bills. She just saw a human being being treated like garbage. "Wait," Sophie called out, stepping between Derek and the old man. The room went deadly silent. Derek turned to her, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Sophie, step back to your station. Now." "He said he has a reservation, Derek," Sophie said, her voice trembling but her chin high. "We should check the book." "Don't be an idiot," Derek hissed, leaning close to her face. "He's a vagrant. If you side with him, you walk out the door with him." The old man looked at Sophie. For a second, the fog in his eyes cleared. He looked at her name tag, then up at her face. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the resolve. "Sit?" the man asked, looking directly at Sophie. Sophie ignored Derek's murderous glare. She grabbed a menu. "Yes, sir. We have a table right here." She gestured to a small, two-top table near the kitchen doors, the worst seat in the house, but a seat nonetheless. It was secluded, away from Beatrice Vanderwall's judgmental eyes. "Sophie!" Derek barked. "If he doesn't pay, I'll cover his bill," Sophie said quietly to her boss. "Please, just let him eat." Derek stared at her, his jaw working. He calculated the scene. Making a bigger fuss would disturb the other guests more than just letting the old man sit in the corner. He straightened his jacket, sneering. "Fine, it's coming out of your tips, Sophie, and when he leaves, you're fired." He spun on his heel and stormed off. Sophie guided the man to the table. He collapsed into the chair, the wet plastic bag crinkling on his lap. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of dignity beneath the grime. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'm Sophie," she said gently, placing a napkin on his lap. "Can I get you something warm to drink? Coffee? Tea?" The man shook his head. He pointed a shaking finger at the menu, specifically at the most expensive item, the Wagyu ribeye with truffle reduction. "Meat," he said, "and aquavit." Sophie paused. Aquavit. It was a strong Scandinavian spirit, rarely ordered. They had a bottle behind the bar that had been collecting dust for years. "Aquavit," Sophie repeated. "You're from Scandinavia?" The man didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the rain, retreating back into his silence. By 8:12 p.m., the restaurant was at capacity. The energy was frantic. Sophie was running herself ragged, covering her usual section, plus the old man's table, all while dodging Derek's deliberate attempts to sabotage her. He bumped into her near the kitchen. He accidentally deleted her orders from the computer system. He was making her last shift a living hell. The old man, whom Sophie had mentally nicknamed the Viking because of his stoic silence, ate slowly. He cut his steak with precise, elegant movements that contradicted his disheveled appearance. He didn't eat like a man starving. He ate like a man savoring. But the peace couldn't last. Beatrice Vanderwall, having finished her third glass of wine, decided she was bored. She waved Derek over. "Derek, honestly," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "The smell is drifting over here. It's ruining my foie gras. Why is that creature still here?" Derek sighed theatrically. "I apologize, Mrs. Vanderwall. One of my waitresses. Let's just say she has a charity case complex. She will be dealt with." "Well, deal with it now," Beatrice snapped. "Or I'm calling the owner. I know Arthur Sterling personally, you know." The name dropped like a bomb. Arthur Sterling. Everyone in the hospitality industry knew the name. Sterling was the reclusive billionaire behind the Sterling Group, a conglomerate that owned hotels, vineyards, and Michelin star restaurants across the globe, including L'Our d'Or. He was a ghost. No one had seen him in public for 3 years since his wife passed away. Rumors swirled that he had gone mad or was living on a private island. "I assure you, Arthur Sterling wouldn't want his establishment turned into a soup kitchen," Derek said smoothly. "I will handle it." Derek marched over to Sophie's station. He grabbed the bill folder and slammed it into her chest. "Drop the check," Derek ordered. "Now, get him out." "He's not finished," Sophie protested. "He ordered dessert." "I don't care if he ordered the moon. Beatrice is complaining. He leaves now." Sophie felt tears pricking her eyes. She took the check binder and walked slowly to the corner table. The old man was sipping his aquavit, his eyes closed, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. He looked peaceful for the first time all night. "Sir?" Sophie whispered. He opened his eyes. They were sharp, intelligent blue. "I'm so sorry," Sophie said, her voice cracking. "My manager. He needs the table. I have to bring you the check." The man looked at the bill. It was for $450. He didn't blink. He reached into his wet plastic bag. Sophie held her breath. "Please have money. Please don't let this be a dine and dash." He pulled out a wallet. It wasn't a Velcro wallet or a dirty pouch. It was black leather, worn but distinctly high quality. He opened it, and Sophie saw the flash of a black credit card, the kind made of titanium that has no limit. But before he could hand it to her, a shadow fell over the table. It was Beatrice. She had decided to take matters into her own hands. She stood over the table, clutching her pearls, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "You are absolutely revolting," she spat at the old man. "Do you have any idea how much this dinner costs? You probably stole that wallet." The old man froze. His hand hovered over the card. "Beatrice, please," Sophie stepped in, putting herself between the woman and the customer. "He is paying. Please go back to your seat." "Don't you shush me, you little servant," Beatrice screeched, causing the entire restaurant to go dead silent. "I am a VIP. This man is a pollution." She reached out and grabbed the glass of aquavit from the table. "You want a drink? Here." With a sneer, she threw the contents of the glass onto the old man. The strong spirit splashed over his face and his frayed coat. The gasp in the room was audible. Sophie gasped, horror flooding her veins. The old man sat motionless. Liquid dripped from his chin. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He looked incredibly small, incredibly defeated. Derek rushed over, but not to help the man. He rushed to Beatrice. "Mrs. Vanderwall, are you all right? Did he threaten you?" "He looked at me," Beatrice cried, playing the victim perfectly. "I felt unsafe." "That's it," Derek yelled. "Security! Get him out and call the police. He assaulted a guest." "No," Sophie screamed. "She threw the drink on him. I saw it. Everyone saw it." "Shut up, Sophie," Derek roared. "You're fired. Get your things and get out." 2 security guards grabbed the old man by the shoulders, hauling him out of the chair. The plastic bag fell to the floor, spilling its contents. Not trash, but a stack of old, leather-bound journals and a framed photograph of a beautiful woman standing in a field of lavender. The old man struggled, his face turning red. He tried to speak English, but the stress made his words fail him. No. Stop. They dragged him toward the door. The patrons watched, some laughing, most indifferent. Sophie couldn't let it end like this. She knew she was fired. She knew she had nothing left to lose. She remembered the aquavit. She remembered the accent. She remembered the summers she spent as a child in Oslo with her grandmother, learning the language of the fjords. She ran to the center of the room, blocking the security guard's path. "Slipham!" Sophie shouted. The words rang out, clear and sharp. The security guards paused, confused. Derek stopped. Beatrice blinked, but the effect on the old man was electric. He stopped struggling. He lifted his head, locking eyes with Sophie. She took a deep breath and spoke again, this time in fluent, crisp Norwegian, the dialect of the upper class, the language of the old families. "Slipham. Det en æresgjest. Ser der ikke hvem han er. Let him go. This is a guest of honor. Do you not see who he is?" The room was silent. But the old man straightened his spine. He shook the guards off him, as if they were children. He stood up, wiping the aquavit from his face with a slow, deliberate motion. He looked at Sophie, and for the first time, he spoke in a clear, booming voice. Not in broken English, but in perfect, commanding Norwegian. "Takk, mitt barn. Det var på tide at noen snakket fornuft her. Thank you, my child. It was about time someone spoke sense here." He turned to Derek. The confused, trembling look was gone. In its place was the cold, hard stare of a predator who had just decided to stop playing with his food. "You," the man said in English, his accent now refined, sharp, and terrifyingly familiar to anyone who watched the business news. "You mentioned Arthur Sterling earlier," Derek stammered, his face pale. Yes. The owner." The man reached into his coat pocket, bypassing the wallet, and pulled out a handkerchief to dab his face. Then he reached down, picked up the framed photo of the woman in the lavender field, and kissed it gently. "My name," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder, "is Henrik Vanger. But my friends and my employees call me Arthur Sterling." The silence that descended upon Lursdor was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals or the seconds following a gunshot. Derek stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. His brain was misfiring, struggling to reconcile two impossible images: the dirty, rain-soaked vagrant he had just tried to evict, and the face he had seen in the company orientation videos, the face of the man who signed his paychecks, the man whose net worth rivaled the GDP of small countries. "Mr. Sterling," Derek squeaked. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a primal, sweating terror. The old man, Arthur Sterling, didn't look at him. He looked at the security guard, Thomas, who was still gripping his arm. "Take your hand off me," Arthur said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Thomas released him instantly, stepping back as if burned. "I didn't know, sir. I was just following protocol. Mr. Derek told me." "Quiet," Arthur commanded. He adjusted his frayed lapels. He turned back to Sophie. The hard lines of his face softened. He spoke to her in Norwegian again, his voice dropping to a gentle timbre that the terrified onlookers couldn't understand. "Du modig, jenta mi. Vad heter du?" "You are brave, my girl. What is your name?" Sophie's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She curtsied, an instinctive reaction from her childhood summers in Oslo. "Sophie, sir. Sophie Miller." "Sophie Miller," Arthur repeated, switching back to English so the room could hear. You were the only one. The only one in a room full of people wearing silk and diamonds who showed an ounce of humanity. He walked slowly toward the center of the room. The guests, who had been sneering minutes ago, now looked down at their plates, terrified of making eye contact. Beatrice van der Waal was trembling, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. She clutched her wine glass so hard the stem looked ready to snap. Arthur stopped at the head of the dining room. He looked like a king in beggar's clothes. "Do you know why I am here tonight?" Arthur asked, addressing the room at large. "Do you know why I am wearing these clothes?" No one dared to answer. "Today marks exactly 3 years since my wife, Catherine, died," Arthur said. His voice wavered slightly, but he steeled himself. "We met in a place very much like this. But we were poor then. We had nothing. I wanted to see if the spirit of hospitality, the spirit that Catherine loved, still existed in my restaurants. I wanted to see if a man is judged by his character or by the cut of his coat." He turned his gaze slowly, landing on Derek like a laser sight. "I have my answer." Derek took a step forward, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Mr. Sterling, please, you have to understand. We have a standard. We have strict policies about dress code to protect the experience of our guests. I was protecting your brand." Arthur laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Protecting my brand? You think my brand is cruelty? You think my brand is humiliation?" Arthur walked over to the table where he had been sitting, the table near the kitchen door. He picked up the plastic bag that Derek had sneered at. He pulled out the stack of journals. "These," Arthur said, holding them up, "are the design journals for the new hotel chain I am launching next year. A project worth $4 billion. I came here tonight looking for a manager to lead that project. Someone with empathy. Someone with vision." He dropped the journals onto the table with a heavy thud. "I found a manager," Arthur said, looking at Derek, "but unfortunately, he is currently employed at Lure's door, and he is about to have a very bad night." Derek looked sick. He looked at Sophie, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. He had not just fired a waitress. He had persecuted the woman who had just saved the owner's life. Arthur turned to Sophie. "Sophie, please, sit down." "Sir?" Sophie blinked. "Sit," Arthur insisted, pulling out the chair opposite him. "You are no longer waiting tables tonight. You are dining with me." Sophie hesitated, looking at her apron. "But I'm on the clock." Derek said. "Derek," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "is going to be very busy." Arthur snapped his fingers. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Derek!" "Yes, yes, sir!" Derek rushed forward, sweating profusely. Arthur pointed to the wine stain on his coat and the puddle of aquavit on the floor where Beatrice had thrown the drink. "There is a mess on the floor," Arthur said. "Clean it up." Derek blinked. I'll get a busboy right away." "No," Arthur said. "You misunderstand. You will clean it up. And after that, you will serve us our dinner. And if the service is not impeccable, if my water glass remains empty for more than 10 seconds, you will ensure that you never work in this city again. Do I make myself clear?" The color drained from Derek's face completely. He looked at the busboys, who were watching with wide eyes. He looked at the wealthy patrons. He looked at Sophie, the girl he had bullied for weeks. "Crystal clear, sir," Derek whispered. "Good," Arthur said, sitting down and gesturing for Sophie to join him. "Now, fetch a towel and bring us the menu, the real menu, not the one you give to people you think are trash." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted into a surreal, high-stakes theater. Sophie sat across from the billionaire, her apron still tied around her waist, while her manager, the man who had terrorized her, crawled on his hands and knees beside the table, scrubbing the aquavit from the marble floor with a rag. The patrons were trapped. They couldn't leave. They sensed that walking out now would be an admission of guilt, an alignment with the cruelty that Arthur Sterling was dismantling. So they ate in terrified silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound in the cavernous room. Arthur ignored them. He focused entirely on Sophie. "So, Norway," Arthur said, unfolding his napkin. "You speak the dialect of the West Coast. Bergen?" "My grandmother," Sophie managed to say, her hand still trembling as she reached for her water glass. "She was from a small village outside of Bergen. She raised me after my parents died. She taught me that everyone has a story, and you should never judge a book until you've read the last page." Arthur smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed his face. A wise woman. Wiser than anyone in this room. Derek appeared at the table, breathless and red-faced. He held 2 menus. His hands shook so badly the menus rattled. "Your menus, sir." "Ms. Miller," Derek choked out. Arthur didn't look at him. "Read the specials to us, Derek, and put some passion into it. Sell it." Derek swallowed hard. He began to recite the specials, his voice cracking. "Fresh Dover sole, flown in this morning, with a lemon caper reduction." "Boring," Arthur interrupted. "You sound like a robot. Again." Sophie felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. She watched Derek, the man who had called her pathetic, now dancing on strings for a man in a dirty coat. "Arthur." "Mr. Sterling," Sophie said softly. "He's terrified." "Maybe." "Mercy," Arthur noted, looking at her with approval. "You have too much of it, Sophie. It will serve you well. But tonight, justice needs to be served first." Suddenly, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Beatrice Vanderwall stood up. She had recovered her composure. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the indignation of a woman who had never been told no in her life. She grabbed her Hermes bag and threw her napkin onto the table. "This is ridiculous," Beatrice announced, her voice shrill. "I am leaving. I will not sit here and watch a floor show performed by a lunatic, billionaire or not." "Come along, Charles." Her husband, a silent, mousy man, began to rise, but stopped when he saw Arthur's expression. Arthur slowly turned his head toward Beatrice. He didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He simply leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Vanderwall," Arthur said. "Sit down." "Excuse me?" Beatrice gasped. "You can't order me around. I'm a paying customer. My husband is Charles Vanderwall, CEO of Vanderwall Logistics." "I know exactly who your husband is," Arthur said calmly. "And I know exactly who owns the debt that Vanderwall Logistics is currently drowning in." The mousy husband, Charles, went white. He dropped back into his seat as if his strings had been cut. "Charles," Beatrice looked at her husband. "What is he talking about?" Arthur continued, his voice as cold as the Oslo winter. "Sterling Private Equity bought the distressed debt of your husband's company 3 days ago. Technically, Mrs. Vanderwall, I own your house. I own your car. I own the yacht you took to Saint-Tropez last summer. And I certainly own the credit card you were planning to use to pay for this meal." The room gasped. This wasn't just a restaurant drama anymore. This was a public execution of social status. Arthur picked up his glass of water. "You threw a drink on me because you thought I was powerless. You thought I was beneath you. Now you realize that your entire lifestyle exists at my whim." Beatrice's mouth worked, but no sound came out. The superiority drained out of her, leaving her looking old and frightened. "I could bankrupt you with a phone call," Arthur said, taking a sip of water. I could have your assets frozen before dessert is served." Beatrice began to sob. It was an ugly, desperate sound. "Please, I didn't know. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize to me," Arthur snapped. He pointed a long finger across the table at Sophie. "Apologize to her. She tried to protect you. She tried to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life, and you called her a servant." Beatrice turned to Sophie. Mascara ran down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm so sorry. Please tell him to spare us." Sophie looked at the woman. She saw the fear. She remembered the rent she couldn't pay, the struggle to survive in a city that these people treated like a playground. She could have enjoyed this. She could have asked Arthur to destroy them. But she looked at the photo of Arthur's wife on the table. The woman in the lavender field looked kind, gentle. "Mr. Sterling," Sophie said quietly, "let them go. She's humiliated enough. Ruining her life won't make the aquavit taste any better." Arthur studied Sophie for a long moment. The tension in the room was electric. Finally, he nodded. "You see," Arthur said to the room, "that is class, that is dignity. Something none of you could buy." He waved a hand at Beatrice and Charles. "Get out, and don't ever set foot in a Sterling property again. If I see your name on a reservation list in London, Tokyo, or New York, I will cancel it personally." Beatrice and Charles scrambled out of the restaurant, leaving their unfinished dinner behind. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving a ringing silence. Arthur turned back to his meal, which Derek had just placed in front of him with trembling hands. "Now," Arthur said, picking up his knife and fork, "let's discuss your future, Sophie, because as of this moment, you are no longer a waitress." "I'm fired?" Sophie asked, panic flaring again. Arthur chuckled, cutting into his steak. "Fired? No, my dear. I'm promoting you. But first, we have one more rat to catch." He looked toward the kitchen doors. "Derek, tell the head chef to come out here, and bring the accounting books for the last 6 months. I noticed some irregularities in the supply costs while I was reviewing the quarterly reports. I assumed it was inflation, but looking at how you run this floor, I suspect it's something far more criminal." Derek dropped the water pitcher. It shattered on the floor, glass exploding everywhere. "Sir, Derek stammered, tears forming in his eyes. "I can explain." "I don't want explanations," Arthur said, chewing his steak thoughtfully. "I want the books. Now." The night was far from over. Arthur Sterling wasn't just cleaning house, he was burning the corruption to the ground, and Sophie had a front row seat to the fire. The shattering of the water pitcher was the signal that the polite veneer of Lure's door had completely fractured. The shards of glass lay on the floor like diamonds, reflecting the dim ambient lighting, dangerously sharp and impossible to ignore. Derek was on his knees again, but this time he wasn't cleaning. He was trembling, his hands hovering over the mess, his eyes darting toward the kitchen doors as if looking for an escape route. The arrogance that had defined him for years, the sneer, the straight back, the disdainful flick of the wrist, had dissolved into a puddle of pure, unadulterated panic. "The books, Derek," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He cut another piece of his steak, the knife slicing through the meat with surgical precision. "I won't ask a third time." The kitchen door swung open. The noise of the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the shouting of orders, spilled into the silent dining room for a brief moment before being cut off. Chef Bastian emerged. He was a large man, usually imposing in his pristine white coat, known for a temper that could make grown men cry. But tonight, he looked small. His chef's hat was slightly askew, and he was wiping his hands on a towel with a nervous, compulsive energy. He held a thick, leather-bound binder under his arm. He saw Derek on the floor. He saw the old man in the dirty coat sitting at the best table. He saw Sophie, the quiet waitress, sitting opposite the billionaire. Bastian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Mr. Sterling, it is an honor. We didn't know." "Clearly," Arthur said without looking up. "If you had known, I imagine the inventory reports would look significantly different. Bring it here." Bastian walked to the table, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. He placed the binder next to Arthur's plate. It was the red ledger, the internal log of high-value inventory, truffles, caviar, and the reserve wine list. "Sophie," Arthur said, sliding the binder across the white tablecloth toward her. Sophie jumped slightly. "Sir?" "Open it," Arthur commanded. "You've worked here for 6 months. You know the menu. You know the stock. Look at the wine shipments for November and December. Tell me what you see." Derek scrambled up from the floor. "Sir, she's just a waitress. She doesn't understand the complexities of—" "Silence!" Arthur slammed his hand on the table, the silverware jumping. "I am not asking her to calculate the EBITDA. I am asking her to use her eyes, something you have failed to do." Sophie opened the heavy book. Her hands were still shaking, but as she looked at the rows of numbers and handwriting, her mind sharpened. She was good with numbers. She had to be to juggle her student loans and her mother's medical bills on a waitress's salary. She scanned the columns. Chateau Margaux, 2009. Cases received, 12. Unit cost, $900. Petrus, 2015. Cases received, 6. Unit cost, $3,500. She turned the page. She frowned. She looked at the supplier codes. Then she looked at the waste log, the record of bottles broken or corked and thrown away. "This doesn't make sense," Sophie whispered. Arthur stopped eating. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Go on." "In December," Sophie said, tracing the line with her finger. "We supposedly received 10 cases of the Romanée Conti. That's impossible. We only sell maybe 1 bottle a month. And here," she pointed to the waste log, "it says we threw away 5 bottles of it due to cork taint in the last 2 weeks. She looked up at Arthur. "Sir, I've never seen a bottle of Romanée Conti come back to the bar. Not once. And if we threw away 5 bottles, that's nearly $20,000 of wine in the trash. We would have smelled it. The whole wait staff would have known." Derek lunged forward. "She's lying. She doesn't know what she's talking about. The corks were bad. It happens." Arthur held up a hand, stopping Derek in his tracks. "And the supplier?" Arthur asked Sophie. "Who did we buy these imaginary cases from?" Sophie squinted at the invoice attached to the page. It says Vino Lux Imports. "But we usually order from the standard distributors. I've never seen a delivery truck for Vino Lux." Arthur pulled a sleek black smartphone from his tattered coat pocket. It was a jarring contrast, the latest technology in the hands of a man dressed like a beggar. He tapped the screen a few times. "Vino Lux Imports," Arthur read aloud. "Incorporated 3 months ago. Registered address, a residential apartment in Queens." Arthur slowly raised his eyes to meet Derek's. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And who owns this apartment in Queens, Derek?" Derek didn't answer. He was hyperventilating. "It belongs to a Ms. Sarah Jenkins," Arthur said, "who, if I recall from your personnel file, happens to be your sister." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. "You've been buying cheap wine," Arthur deduced, his voice hard as iron. "Relabeling it, charging my customers thousands of dollars for vinegar, and then billing the restaurant for premium stock from a shell company you own, pocketing the difference. And to cover the inventory count, you mark the expensive bottles as broken or spoiled, and likely sell the real ones on the black market. Arthur looked at Chef Bastian. And you, Chef, did you sign off on this? Did you get a cut? Bastian crumbled. The large man began to weep. I have gambling debts, Mr. Sterling. Derek said it was easy. He said you never checked the books. He said you were a ghost. A ghost? Arthur repeated, a sad smile touching his lips. Yes, I suppose I was. But ghosts have a way of haunting the places they left behind. Arthur closed the ledger. This is grand larceny, fraud, embezzlement. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. He looked at Sophie. You see, Sophie? This is why I needed you. I have an army of accountants in high-rise buildings who look at spreadsheets all day. But they only see the numbers I show them. They don't see the bottles in the trash. They don't see the delivery trucks that never arrive. I needed someone on the ground. Someone honest. Derek suddenly stopped hyperventilating. His fear was being replaced by something darker, something desperate. He looked at the exit. The security guard, Thomas, was standing there, but Thomas looked confused, unsure of whose side to take. Derek looked at the steak knife resting on the edge of the table. I'm not going to jail, Derek whispered. I'm not going to prison for a few bottles of wine. It's not just wine, Derek, Arthur said, reaching for his phone again. I'm calling the police. No, Derek screamed. The explosion of violence happened in a heartbeat. Derek didn't reach for the knife to attack Arthur. He knew he couldn't win a fight against the security guards who would eventually intervene. Instead, he went for the leverage. He lunged across the table, his hand clawing out not for the billionaire, but for Sophie. Sophie shrieked as Derek's hand clamped around her wrist. He yanked her out of the chair, spinning her around and pulling her back against his chest. With his other hand, he grabbed the heavy steak knife from the table. Back off! Derek screamed, pressing the serrated blade toward Sophie. Don't touch that phone, Sterling! Drop it! The restaurant erupted into chaos. The few remaining diners screamed and dove under their tables. Chef Bastian backed away, hands raised in surrender. Derek, let her go, Arthur said. He didn't stand up. He didn't flinch. He sat with an eerie stillness, his phone still in his hand, his thumb hovering over the screen. You think you can just walk in here and ruin my life? Derek spat, his breath hot and frantic against Sophie's ear. Sophie was frozen, tears streaming down her face, the cold metal of the knife dangerously close to her arm. I built this place. I ran this floor while you were mourning in your mansion. I deserve that money. You stole, Arthur said calmly. You compromised the integrity of my wife's legacy. And now you are threatening a young woman who has done nothing but show kindness. You are digging a hole, Derek, that you will never climb out of. Shut up, Derek yelled, swinging the knife wildly before bringing it back to Sophie. I'm walking out of here, and she's coming with me until I'm clear. Thomas, open the back door. If anyone follows me, I swear I'll hurt her. Thomas, the security guard, took a step forward, his hand on his belt. Derek, don't be stupid. Put the knife down. Open the door, Derek shrieked, his grip tightening on Sophie's wrist so hard she cried out in pain. Sophie's mind was racing. She felt the vibrations of Derek's heart pounding against her back. He was terrified, and terrified men made fatal mistakes. She looked at Arthur. The old man's eyes were locked on hers. He gave her a microscopic nod. It wasn't a signal to attack. It was a signal of reassurance. I am here. Derek, Sophie said, her voice trembling but audible. You don't want to do this. Fraud is 5 years. Kidnapping with a weapon, that's 20. That's life. I said, shut up. Derek shook her. Think about your sister, Arthur interjected smoothly. Sarah, the one in Queens. If you walk out that door with a hostage, The police will raid her apartment within the hour. She'll be an accessory to kidnapping. Do you hate your sister that much, Derek?" Derek hesitated. The mention of his sister cracked his resolve. The knife wavered. Derek stammered. "Put the knife on the table," Arthur said, his voice dropping to that hypnotic, commanding tone he had used earlier. "Let Sophie go, and I will ensure your sister is left out of this. I will tell the police she was a pawn, unaware of your scheme. I will save her, but only if you surrender. Right. Now." It was a masterclass in negotiation. Arthur wasn't offering Derek a way out. He was offering him a way to save the only thing he had left. Derek looked at the door. He looked at Sophie. He looked at the billionaire who held the world in his hands. The fight drained out of him. His shoulders slumped. The knife clattered onto the white tablecloth, staining the linen with a drop of sauce. Derek released Sophie, and she stumbled forward, gasping for air. "Thomas," Arthur said quietly. The security guard moved instantly. He tackled Derek, pinning him to the ground and cuffing his hands behind his back with plastic zip ties from his belt. Derek began to sob, his face pressed against the marble floor he had forced Sophie to clean so many times. I'm sorry. Sophie stood by the table, rubbing her bruised wrist. Her legs felt like jelly. She looked at Arthur, waiting for him to be shaken, to be relieved. But Arthur Sterling simply picked up his napkin, dabbed his mouth, and took a sip of his water. "Are you all right, Sophie?" he asked, as casually as if he were asking about the weather. I think so," Sophie breathed. "You knew he wouldn't hurt me." "I knew he was a coward," Arthur said. "Cowards steal when no one is looking. They don't have the stomach for real violence. But I apologize that you had to endure that. It was necessary to see the full extent of his character." Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. Arthur had pressed the button on his phone long before Derek had even picked up the knife. "The police will be here in 2 minutes," Arthur said. He stood up, finally. He buttoned his frayed, dirty coat. "They will take statements. It will be a long night. But before they arrive, we have business to conclude." He walked around the table and stood in front of Sophie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It wasn't paper. It was heavy, gold-edged cardstock with a simple embossed S. "I told you I was looking for a manager for my new project," Arthur said. "I lied." Sophie's heart sank. "Oh, I don't need a manager," Arthur corrected. "I have plenty of managers. They are efficient, boring, and morally flexible. What I need is a protégé." He pressed the card into her hand. "The project is not a hotel," Arthur revealed. "It is the Arthur and Catherine Sterling Foundation. We oversee $3 billion in charitable grants, housing initiatives, and, yes, hospitality training for the underprivileged. I need a director of operations, someone who knows what it feels like to be invisible, someone who speaks the language of the people, not just the language of the boardroom." He gestured to the empty, chaotic restaurant. "You stood up for a beggar against a king," Arthur said softly. "You risked your livelihood for a stranger. That is a currency more valuable than anything in my bank account." Sophie looked at the card. It had a phone number and an address for a penthouse office in Midtown. "The starting salary is $250,000 a year," Arthur said, "plus full benefits, and I believe we can do something about those student loans of yours. Consider it a signing bonus." Sophie stared at him, her mouth open. Mr. Sterling, I don't have a degree in business. I'm just a waitress." Arthur smiled, and this time his blue eyes twinkled with mischief. "Sophie, look at me. I'm a billionaire wearing a coat I found in a Goodwill bin. If tonight has taught you anything, it should be that labels are meaningless. You have the heart. I can teach you the rest. The front doors burst open. Blue and red lights flooded the entryway. Police officers swarmed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. Arthur turned to the officers, raising his hands calmly. "Over here, gentlemen," Arthur called out, his voice authoritative. "The trash is on the floor," he pointed at Derek. "Please take it out." The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan in a dizzying rhythm of red and blue. Inside Law's door, the silence had returned. Derek was gone, hauled away in a squad car, leaving behind a shattered career and a staff in shock. Sophie sat opposite Arthur Sterling, the Viking, who now looked just like a tired old man. "You should go home, Sophie," Arthur said gently. "My driver is outside." Sophie looked at the gold-embossed business card in her hand. It felt heavier than paper should. "Mr. Sterling, are you sure? I dropped out of college. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. I know how to balance plates, not budgets." Arthur took a sip of water. "Do you know why Derek failed? It wasn't because he was greedy. It was because he knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. I can hire 1,000 MBAs from Harvard tomorrow. They can build spreadsheets that would make your head spin. But I cannot teach them integrity. I cannot teach them the courage to stand between a bully and a victim. You have the one thing that cannot be bought." He stood up. "Come to the office on Monday. We have work to do." The transition was not a fairy tale. It was a trial by fire. Monday morning brought a stack of files 3 feet high. The Sterling Foundation wasn't just a charity. It was a massive global operation. For the first 3 months, Sophie felt like she was drowning. The imposter syndrome was a physical weight on her chest. The other executives, men in pinstripe suits with degrees from Yale, looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. "She's a charity case," Sophie heard the CFO, a man named Henderson, whisper by the water cooler. "Arthur's gone senile. He picked up a stray cat and put her in the C-suite. She's just the waitress." Sophie wanted to quit. She marched into Arthur's office that Friday, ready to resign. "I can't do this," she admitted, fighting back tears. "Henderson is right. I don't belong here." Arthur didn't turn from the window. "Catherine was a school teacher," he said softly. He walked over and handed Sophie the framed photo of his late wife in the lavender field. "When we started, she did the accounting at the kitchen table. She cleaned the hotel rooms herself. She didn't know business. She knew people. She knew that if the numbers didn't reflect the truth, the business would rot." He looked Sophie in the eye. "You aren't here to be Henderson. You are here to be Catherine. Stop trying to impress the suits. Start looking at the problems like a human being. Start looking for the dirt under the rug." Something clicked in Sophie's mind. She realized Arthur wasn't looking for a business shark. He was looking for a conscience. Sophie wiped her eyes and returned to her desk. She pulled the Detroit housing project file that Henderson had prepared. She stopped looking at the margins and started looking at the reality. An hour later, she walked back into Arthur's office. "Henderson's budget is garbage," Sophie stated, her voice steady. "He allocated 40% to administrative overhead and consulting fees for his friends' firms. Only 20% is going to actual construction materials. If we approve this, those houses will fall apart in 5 years." Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin that reached his eyes. "And what do you propose?" "We fire the consultants," Sophie said. "We hire local contractors from the neighborhood. It cuts costs by half and creates jobs for the people living there." Arthur laughed, a loud, booming sound. "Do it, and while you're at it, Fire Henderson. I never liked his tie." That was the moment Sophie stopped being a waitress and started being a leader. She learned that her empathy wasn't a weakness, it was the sharpest weapon in the room. 1 year later. The private terminal at JFK Airport was a world away from the chaotic noise of the main gates. Here, the air smelled of lilies and expensive coffee. Sophie walked through the glass doors of the Sterling Aviation Lounge, her heels clicking rhythmically on the polished terrazzo. She was no longer the frightened waitress in a stained apron. She wore a tailored cream suit that screamed quiet luxury, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She was the director of operations for the Sterling Foundation, flying to Oslo for the Global Hospitality Summit to deliver the keynote speech. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sophie." The concierge, Leo, beamed. "Captain Evans is ready. Wheels up in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Leo." Sophie smiled warmly. "How is your mother?" "Much better. Thanks to that specialist you recommended," Leo replied. As Sophie turned toward the screening area, a shrill, desperate voice cut through the serene atmosphere. "This is preposterous. I have been a member for 20 years. You cannot deny me entry." Sophie stopped. She knew that voice. She turned slowly to see a woman arguing frantically with the security agent. It was Beatrice Vanderwall, but this wasn't the imperious socialite who had terrorized Lore's door. Beatrice looked dismantled. Her coat was off the rack and ill-fitting. Her hair was graying and frizzy. She clutched a battered handbag, her face pale with panic. "Ma'am, your membership was revoked a year ago," the agent said patiently, "and your card has been declined." "But I need to get on that charter," Beatrice cried, tears spilling over. "My sister in London is in critical condition. The commercial flights are grounded due to the storm. Please." Sophie watched her. The news of the Vanderwall bankruptcy had been brutal. Mansions seized, assets frozen. The woman who had once sneered at a billionaire for looking poor was now begging for a favor she couldn't afford. It would have been easy to walk away. It would have been poetic justice to let Beatrice suffer in the lobby. But Sophie touched the locket around her neck, a gift from Arthur containing a small photo of his late wife, Catherine. Character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Sophie walked up to the desk. "Is there a problem, Leo?" Beatrice whipped her head around. She squinted, not recognizing the powerful woman standing before her. "Ms. Sophie," Leo said. "I was just escorting her out." "Wait," Beatrice breathed, staring at Sophie's eyes. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. "You're the girl, the waitress. Sophie?" "I am," Sophie said, calmly. Beatrice flushed crimson, looking down at her scuffed shoes. "Oh God, you must be enjoying this." "Not particularly," Sophie replied. "I heard about your troubles, Beatrice. I'm sorry." Beatrice looked up, shocked by the lack of malice. "My sister. She's dying. I just wanted to say goodbye." Sophie looked at Leo. "Is the G550 stopping in London before heading to Oslo?" "Yes, Ms. Sophie." "Good." Sophie turned to Beatrice. "You're flying with me. We'll drop you in London." Beatrice's jaw dropped. "What? After I got you fired? After I humiliated you?" "You did," Sophie agreed, her voice steady. "You judged a book by its cover, and it cost you everything. But I'm not you, Beatrice. I don't kick people when they're down." She motioned for Beatrice to follow her. "But there is one condition." "Anything," Beatrice sobbed. "When you get to the hospital," Sophie said, "you thank the nurses. You treat the janitors with respect. You look them in the eye and remember that they are just as important as you are. I promise," Beatrice whispered, wiping her eyes. "I promise." When the jet finally touched down in Oslo, the runway was blanketed in white snow. Arthur Sterling was waiting in the hangar, leaning on a cane, wrapped in a modest wool coat. He watched Sophie descend the stairs, seeing the fire in her eyes tempered by grace. She wasn't just his employee anymore. She was family. "You're late," Arthur grumbled with a smile as she approached. "I picked up a stray," Sophie replied, kissing him on the cheek. "Dropped her off in London. I thought it was what Catherine would have done." Arthur paused. He looked at her, his blue eyes shining with pride. "You know, Sophie," Arthur said, looking out at the frozen fjords, "everyone thought I was crazy for walking into that restaurant dressed like a beggar. They thought I was testing them. But I wasn't testing them. I was looking for hope." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for proving that it still exists." Sophie looked out at the horizon. She had come a long way from the girl counting tips to pay the rent. She had learned that the world is full of judges, but in the end, the silent billionaire had found his voice, and the waitress had found her wings. What a journey for Sophie. From being humiliated by the arrogant elite to becoming the right hand of a billionaire, she proved that true class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat others. Beatrice learned her lesson the hard way, and even Derek got exactly what he deserved. It just goes to show, be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because you might meet them on your way down. If you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes at the airport? Would you have helped Beatrice, or let her suffer? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.